Hi, everyone. Welcome to Unexplored Oregon. We're going to give everyone just a few more minutes here to jump into the webinar today until we kick off with the tasting. I will just run through some housekeeping for everyone. We are going to run through the masterclass, introducing each wine by region and then winemaker. So if you are wanting to play along with the Master the World quiz that Evan and the team have created, I recommend you go through and do those questions now, quickly taste through the wines, blind taste right now, so that you can see and answer the questions to the wines. And then I would also love everyone to be interactive. I can see you all saying hi in the chat. We've got from Raleigh, North Carolina. Hi, Stacy. We've got lots of people coming in. Okay, so where is everyone from? Let us know where you're from today while everyone's joining still. Boston, are you guys covered in snow? I was talking to someone earlier today. They just got 5 feet over in Connecticut, I think it was. We have a typical Pacific Northwest liquid sunshine here today. Denver, Chicago. Oh, we love Chicago. We miss Chicago. Vancouver, Washington. Yay. Great. So this is where we're going to ask you to chat to each other, say hi to winemakers. We've got winemakers from all around the state on today. We've got Ken Palo and Chad Stock from the Willamette Valley. We have Biller Naravane from Eastern Oregon, Walla Walla. We have Stephen Thompson from the north along the river in Hood River and Columbia Gorge AVA. And we have JP and Dyson Damara from Southern Oregon, from the Umpqua and Rogue Valleys. Great. So I'm going to give everyone just a couple of minutes more, and then we're going to jump right in. Let me check on my time. Okay, we got like 5 minutes. Okay, the Q&A today, can you please put your questions in there for the winemakers? And I do encourage you all to please go ahead and really be interactive in this tasting. It's, I was saying earlier in our prep call that when we normally do these tastings, it's normally me and one other person presenting, usually Evan or Chris Tangi, and we're presenting to all of you. But this time, because it's virtual, I get to have 6 great winemakers along with me. So please, I want this to be a really interactive tasting. You're not going to hear from me that often. It's really going to be all about them and about the wines. And so I want you asking them questions about the varieties, the region, the AVAs, anything that's burning, hot poker in your mind. Get your questions out to them, and we're going to have a really fun tasting today. So I'm going to start right in now so that we can start hearing from these winemakers. And I'm also going to ask Paige and Lemang to guide some of the Q&A questions if I miss any that are coming through as well. But let's get started here. So you are all part of the Unexplored Oregon Masterclass. This is the first time that we've had 6 winemakers from around the state and 6 different wines from around the state. So I'm pretty excited about this class. As I mentioned, please jump in and ask a lot of questions, and be sure to answer those quiz questions from the Masters of the World folks, because you're about to get the wines revealed to you if they're not obvious to you. So here we go. Well, of course, now I can't. There we go. Okay, growing regions of Oregon. So Oregon's post-prohibition wine industry is actually celebrating its 60th anniversary this year. Did any of you know that? 60 years of Oregon winemaking. Richard Summers planted Riesling, Pinot Noir, and believe it or not, Malbec at Hillcrest Vineyard in the Umpqua Valley in 1961. Today, we're going to be tasting a Malbec from those very vines, and it is the oldest vineyard still in production in Oregon. And we'll also be tasting from another, one of the oldest vineyards in the Willamette Valley, David Hill Estate Vineyard, and their Pinot Noir. So from just a handful of vineyards and wineries in the 1960s, to nearly 1,300 vineyards and 900 wineries in production today across 21 AVAs, including 4 cross-border AVAs. Oregon is truly in growth. The diversity of climates and sites, from high desert in the Rogue Valley to alpine and maritime influenced growing regions in the Willamette Valley and Umpqua Valley, to the heavily river influenced Columbia Gorge and continental Eastern Oregon, all of our wines deliver a commonality of bright fruit expressions and really vibrant acidities. So I want you all to be looking out for those markers in how you get to Oregon in a blind tasting. The Oregon industry continues to grow and thrive, with new AVAs being approved each year and varietal exploration increasing too, with more than 80 varieties in commercial production today. Today's class will explore all of these dramatically different regions as we taste across all 6 regions and 5 varieties. First, we're moving into the Willamette Valley, Oregon's first AVA, and established in 1983. It's also one of the largest in the state. It's centered around the Willamette Valley watershed and is nearly 3.5 million acres, with just 25,000 acres of current plantings to date. It's established on 3 soil series: ancient ocean uplift marine sediments, volcanic basalts, and wind-blown loess, which are what 2 of the most recent AVAs have been demarcated around. The first plantings in the Willamette Valley encompassed multiple varieties, from Pinot Noir and Merlot to Riesling and Chardonnay, and the US's first commercial plantings of Pinot Gris. However, it was Pinot Noir that would win the imagination and hearts of those early growers when the Irie 1975 Pinot Noir beat out Burgundies at the Judgment of Paris in 1976. Today, Pinot Noir accounts for more than 80% of Willamette Valley plantings. One of the original vineyards in the region, David Hill Estate, will taste from today, and those vines are still own-rooted and in healthy production, which we're very fortunate for. But before we jump into Pinot Noir, we are going to explore what many in the Willamette Valley are most excited about: the rise of Willamette Valley Chardonnay. Chardonnay has always been planted here in the valley. It arrived with Charles Curry and David Lett in the form of California Heritage Clonal selections, so the Draper selection and Wente selections. These were shot berry selections and had a lot of hen and chicken bunches, so berries, so unfertilized berries along with fully ripened fertilized berries. However, when these varieties were planted originally, the American palate for Chardonnay in the 1970s and 80s was for ultra-ripe, buttery, and bombastically oaked styles, which California had in spades. It was certainly not the palate that Oregon Chardonnay made, that restrained citrus and acid-driven style with minimal oak influence. It would take nearly 50 years for this style of Chardonnay to become accepted and in demand in the US market for domestic wines. So instead of focusing on Chardonnay, Oregon focused on Pinot Gris, a wine and style that was unknown to the US market at the time. And as such, Pinot Gris became the white wine associated with Oregon, as you're all familiar with all of your certification tests. In the past 10 years, however, new Chardonnay plantings have exceeded those of Pinot Gris, and there is new global attention being shown to Oregon Chardonnay. One of those producers receiving international and domestic acclaim is with us today. Walter Scott Wines, winemaker and co-founder Ken Palo is here to give us the lowdown on one of the regions being singled out for exceptional Chardonnay, the Eola Amity Hills AVA. Ken, welcome. Thanks for being here. You're on mute.
There we go. Thank you for having us, me and Walter Scott. Really honored to be here with everyone. Quite the number of participants. This is really exciting, and what you're doing, Bree, to spread the word of Oregon is really special, and we can't thank you enough. So we're going to talk about Seven Springs, this vineyard, and first off, it sits in the Eola Amity Hills, which is one of the AVAs within the Willamette Valley. As you can see on Bree's map here, we're kind of an island, kind of exposed to a lot of the elements. The hillside runs north-south. We get an incredible amount of influence from the Van Duzer corridor. So we're only about 45 miles from the coast. So those cool breezes that come in our warm, dry summers are the biggest influence on what happens in the Eola Amity Hills, other than our soils, which, as Bree mentioned, the soils in this valley, basalt, sediments, and the clays here. So this is mostly volcanic clay, but the difference between Eola Amity Hills and a number of other AVAs in the valley that have basalts is that ours is riddled with rock. Some of that rock is the size of a fist. Some of it can be as big as a car. So planting vineyards here is a precarious situation. So those are the two biggest influences. This particular site, Seven Springs, is one of those iconic vineyards in the Willamette Valley. Planted in 1983, it was a site that a number of producers sought after for Pinot Noir, but as we've discovered, this valley is also very adept and a great place for growing Chardonnay. Our warm, dry summers, cool nights help retain acidity, perfect physiological ripeness, incredible flavor development, but still at lower alcohols because we are still truly a cool climate. And this vineyard, for us, shows off all the things we love about Eola Amity Hills Chardonnay and Willamette Valley Chardonnay. It is a 14-acre block at Seven Springs. So this particular section of Seven Springs is across a ravine and faces south and east and in great exposure. So on Bree's map, it's down to the bottom and over to the left. There's a building surrounded by vineyards and two little blocks. Our section of this vineyard just happens to be on the rockiest section of these 14 acres. It's only 1.7 acres. The exposure is due southeast. So for us, most of the vineyards that we have here in the Willamette Valley have a southeast exposure. So you get sun all day, and then the cool breezes come in, keeping that acidity electric. This vineyard is also meticulously farmed, and that's another thing we can never forget is the influence of the human element. You know, we have all these things that we talk about: terroir, soil, wind, sun, rain, all these elements, which are all here almost perfectly dialed in, and then you have a team that farms it to perfection and delivers us immaculate fruit every year. We actually had a Zoom call with our wine club on Saturday talking about Seven Springs again. It is truly a special site, and this vineyard plays into what we want to achieve with Chardonnay. And I think one thing, as you taste more Willamette Valley Chardonnays, you know, we're still growing, and as Bree mentioned, we're 60 years in, and I think we're still discovering the best sites. Our farming practices have gotten better and better every vintage, and we're still growing and learning. And this place is iconic, and we get we aim for particularly low yields, lower than most. I believe that you get density and power and still have great acidity at lower yields with Chardonnay. I think there's some folks that go the opposite direction, and that's one of the great things is there's many ways to get to your goal, but we're generally one of the first people to pick here. And this site has weight and power, but lightness and freshness, which is something we crave. I mean, it's 12.8% alcohol, but it feels like a much richer, heavier wine. And yeah, so that's Seven Springs, and it's we've worked with it since 2017. It was only planted in 2012 by an incredible Aussie who came here from Australia just to be able to farm biodynamically. So as Bree mentioned, we're, you know, the standards of farming and the things that are happening here with over 60 varietals around, I had no idea. It's amazing. And, you know, Pinot Noir and Chardonnay definitely dominate, but there is some incredibly exciting things that we're inspired by that other people are doing.
Thanks, Ken. We've got a couple of questions. Yes, question or in answer to George Perry. Yes, we're tasting through these wines from 1 to 6 here. And you know, Ken, one of the things that I noticed when I first began tasting Chardonnay in Oregon, you know, when I first came out here, it was, I don't know, 2014. And of course, like everyone else who's, you know, doing certifications around the world, Pinot Noir and Pinot Gris are what's, you know, established in Oregon. But it was really, you know, the Chardonnays and the Eola Amity Hills Chardonnay specifically that really captured my attention when I first tasted through here at the Oregon Chardonnay celebration all those years ago. And there was a real distinctiveness of character through them. And that comment that you made about the richness and the weight, but without having there's density and concentration, but without having excess heaviness on the palate, and still retaining this core of amazing freshness and acidity, and also, you know, savoriness. There's a real like salty, tangy citrus character that runs through these.
I love that.
You farm what, 5 or 6 different sites in the Eola Amity Hills and make 5 different Chardonnays, 6 different Chardonnays from the hills?
So we work with, in the Eola Amity Hills, Sojo, Ex Novo, Seven Springs, Coosa, and Justice. So 5 currently. We're always looking to work with the best sites and the best growers and farmers. So we contract for all of our fruit, very common practice in the Willamette Valley. So we contract by the acre and have more influence on that farming within those acres. But yeah, we made 4 single vineyard Chardonnay from Eola Amity Hills. And then we do, for lack of a better term, our reserve cuvee, named after my wife and my mother-in-law. Cuvée Anne is an all Eola Amity Hills cuvee, really for us showing off those great qualities that we believe are Eola Amity Hills. As you talked about, salty minerality, weight, richness, stone fruits, citrus. I think for me, Seven Springs in particular leans more that stone fruit realm. I would say like more peach, maybe some tangerine, maybe white peach. There's just that richer feel. But again, you know, we get this flavor development and this richness because of our great growing season, because the acidity is retained because of these cooling breezes and cool nights. I mean, you know, there are summers, I want to say 2018, which was what we're drinking, warm, dry, but we had at the Pinot Noir in late July, we had a 48-degree diurnal shift. It was 100 during the day and was 52 degrees at our home, which is just south of this vineyard. So the cool nights really, I think, are important, and that nice even ripening, even with climate change, we're still able to achieve great acidity. And the Eola Amity Hills, I just think, has a distinct quality to it. You know, some producers, like our friend Robert Britton, might say that all of us Eola Amity Hills guys just make reduced Chardonnay, but I think there's a certain, as Pedro Parra likes to talk about, a certain minerality that comes across in wines and kind of plays as this kind of reductive minerality note that I just think is pervasive through here. Yeah, do we pursue it as some producers? Sure. Do we like it and feel like it shows off that tension minerality? Absolutely.
And Ken, there's a couple of questions coming through here about farming and then also about barrels. I guess one of the questions, which is about dry farming, is Seven Springs dry farmed? And I know you're part of the Dry Roots Coalition, one of the organizations in the Willamette Valley who only uses dry farmed fruit. So is that something that Seven Springs does, but also B, that by farming by the acre and having these acreage contracts that you're having more control over the farming practices? What are some of those farming practices that you want control over?
You know, most of our vineyards, everyone we work with is at a minimum organically farmed. We have a few that implement biodynamic practices. You know, I think most of our growers look at their vineyards and see what they need. They're not using biodynamics as a marketing tool, but actually implementing it where it's necessary. And Seven Springs does some 500 and some 501. It's a very healthy vineyard. Our soils are very healthy. You know, for me, the biggest thing that I want done, and yes, Seven Springs is dry farmed. I think appropriate rootstocks and dry farming, as we get warmer and drier, we can dry farm in the Willamette Valley because of our water retentive soils very easily. If we want healthy vineyards and strong vineyards 50 years from now, you have to dry farm. If you irrigate, you're going to create lazy vines, and in hot vintages, you're going to have really troubling conditions and your vines are going to suffer and they're not going to be around long after we're gone. And part of what we do is setting a foundation for future generations. You know, the thing that we want most control of, we trust our growers to plow if needed, their spray programs. With Chardonnay in particular, as we're aiming for lower and lower yields, the one thing that we address is aggressive shoot thinning, so as to set our crop early in the growing season and not be hanging a big crop and then thinning it at veraison. I don't want my vines to be ripening a bunch of fruit that we're going to cut off and put on the ground. It's like running up a hill with a backpack on with a bunch of stuff that you don't need. You've wasted the vine's energy. And I think in giving the vine less fruit to ripen, that concentration, lower pHs, lower alcohols, and higher total acidities just give wines, as we've talked about, density and power with lightness and freshness. So that's our biggest thing. You know, we're lucky to work with growers that are attentive, thoughtful, caring, and want to grow the best possible fruit. And it's really a partnership. If we're going to put Seven Springs on the vineyard and thank the owners, you know, we have to work together to make sure it's special.
Yeah, and I think that comes through in the wines as well. With the, you know, the winemaking approach is not a lot of heaviness to it. There's not a large amount of artifact, and there's a number of people commenting in the chat about the oak profile, which you know, I guess depending on, you know, where you're used to tasting from, you expect a lot more oak on your Chardonnays, which has, you know, been part of the trend for why Oregon is getting so popular with its Chardonnays now. But can you talk just a little bit about the oak management, the barrel management, and you know, how much new oak, all French oak obviously, but any specific barrel toasts that you're looking at?
So I was fortunate to work at Evening Land for a couple of years and worked with Isabelle Meunier, Dominique Lafon, Brian Hannaford, and Ian Birch. But one of the things that came away from that, other than some of the best friends I have on the planet and getting to have Dominic Lafon as a friend, is that he gave us the green light to have access to his personal barrels for Comte Lafon. So Dami has Vosges Forest, and this is a special selection of Vosges Forest light and long toast that we've been using for a number of years. We also use a lot of Chassagne. I'm a big fan. I think the barrels bring incredible tension and minerality. So we use both of those. A fairly, for some people might consider it a high percentage of new wood, but when you have lower pH and you have higher acidity and lower alcohol, the wood does nothing but frame the good qualities in the wine. It doesn't become the centerpiece. When you have higher alcohol and higher pH, it brings more wood into the wine. And then you feel it and taste it, where this is just, it's kind of like a vice. It's like cranking down and concentrating all the great things that are already there. We started out using a lot of 500s in 2011. I mean, to just tell you where we are, we made 140 cases of Chardonnay in 2011. 2019, we made 3,600 cases of Chardonnay. So it's 60% of our production. So we were definitely all in. So building up our barrel program has meant that, well, we've experimented a little bit. We're never going to stop learning, but we've started incorporating more 350s. I'm not old, but it's not the miles, but the mileage. And at 50, moving 500-liter barrels around is not as easy as it used to be. And 350s achieve the same thing. So you have a higher juice volume to wood ratio, and you get really good tension and minerality with less oxygen exposure. So those are the two barrels we use most.
Yeah, I really like on the palate here, it's sort of corseted, the oak is just corseting the fruit and just, giving it that line and length and really helping it, extend along the palate, and is definitely present there, but it's definitely not, cumbersome the way that higher alcohol Chardonnays can really extract a lot more of that oak sweetness and frame as well. So yeah, this is for me just quintessential Oregon Chardonnay, and especially from the Eole Amity Hills, just that hint of flint and struck match, that the saltiness and concentration and weight, remaining just energetic and elegant at the same time is a hallmark for me of Eole Amity. And I know we're killing a lot of people who don't have the wines out there, so I do apologize. And
people in the winery again, they can come visit.
Yeah, when we're all traveling again, come visit. Yeah, we're a friendly bunch up here. Thanks, Ken, so much for imparting all your knowledge of the region and of Chardonnay. I know there's going to be lots of questions, so if you want to jump into the chat and answer some directly, you're more than welcome to as well.
Thank you, Bree.
Thanks, Ken. And we're going to move now into one of the newest AVAs in the Willamette Valley, the Tualatin Hills AVA. And this was made an AVA in 2020. So something useful did happen during 2020. So I'd like to welcome Chad Stock from David Hill Estate to the screen to begin talking about the Tualatin Hills AVA, why this AVA needed to be created and what it represents in the Northern Willamette Valley, and what are some of the distinctive characteristics and styles that are coming through from this AVA.
Can you see me and hear me?
I can now. Great.
Terrific. Okay.
So can you tell us a little bit about the Tualatin Hills AVA? I know it's in the most northerly part of the Northern Willamette Valley. It, along with Laurelwood District, was created in 2020. But can you tell me the specialness of that?
Yeah, sure. So aside from being the most northern, it's also the most westerly. Not terribly different from the Van Duzer corridor. Just west of where the Eole Hills are, from where Ken was discussing. The primary three factors are actually not really any different than the primary three factors of pretty much any other AVA establishment, which is weather pattern, soils, and basically elevation and aspect. So here for me, I like to start with the weather first, because I think the weather is actually the thing that I see the most impactful on the wine. As well as the grape growing challenges that we have there. So this is a great example of the actual fog layer and the moraine layer that comes in between the Coast Range and the actual David Hill Estate itself in the Tualatin Hills AVA. So we are the highest rainfall AVA of the Willamette Valley, receiving about 44 inches of rainfall per year. And to the west here, the slope that you're looking at in this picture is facing due south. And that's the foothills to the Coast Range in the background. Dead west of this is the Tillamook, the town of Tillamook, which is arguably the wettest area of the state of Oregon, and receives almost double the rainfall that we receive. And the hillsides here are low enough that a lot of the weather system that comes from the ocean through Tillamook actually comes through this valley, which is called Gales Creek, and cools down the vineyards and the farms in this area. Another interesting factor here is that immediately to the east, we also have a close proximity to the Columbia Gorge. And the Columbia Gorge brings in warm air and heavy winds from the east. If you're further south in the Willamette Valley, you're basically going to get more of a circulation effect, more like a sort of like a tornado that kind of happens as the eastern warm winds come from the Columbia Gorge and pushes the warm air down and circulates through the valley and kind of warms the valley up more slowly. Instead, here at the David Hill Estate, what we get is we get a more direct eastern wind. The property heats up faster than a lot of the other AVAs south. One exception would be the northeast flank on the other side of the Chehalis Mountains where Laurelwood AVA is. And then in the afternoons, like clockwork, usually around 2 o'clock, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, the ocean pushes back against that wind from Tillamook. And then we have a huge diurnal shift, oftentimes in excess of 35 or in the 40-degree range, depending on how warm it can be in the summertime. And so we have both really great exposure and get some of the sun-soaked feeling of sort of a warmer site with southwest aspect, but we still retain a lot of the acidity and across the different vineyards that are in this AVA. The soils are also very distinct here. So one of the things about the Laurelwood AVA is it's comprised entirely off of one single soil type, which is really unusual for most of the other AVAs. There is a little bit of basalt beneath what is called the Laurelwood soil. The Laurelwood soils are a wind-blown, loess, very fine silt clay particle that is deposited from the erosion of the Columbia Gorge. So again, these eastern winds that come through and deposit these fine clay silts over many decades, many centuries even, created a small pocket, a very small pocket of this concentrated, very, very deep, light clay soil, which is not really a mixture of any kind of other rock. It's actually just super, super uniform. So it's very low rock content. And in some cases, the soils can actually be deeper than 50 meters, which is pretty phenomenal. Again, lending to a great opportunity to farm without irrigation, to be able to dry farm and have enough water and soil moisture retention to be able to sustain the vines throughout the entire growing season.
Yeah, and I love what you get through on the nose here as well is so much florals and freshness as well. Is that just coming from the diurnal temperature shift, or do you think that's coming from some of that low soil and the depth of the roots here as well on those soil types?
Well, the vines are quite old, so the fruit ripens very slowly, and then in conjunction with the diurnal shift, that slows things down even further. The site does have pronounced acidity for sure. And I do believe in most cases in different appellations, AVAs that I've worked with in my career, usually florals and brighter acidity usually has more to do with northerly or easterly facing or colder, higher elevation sites where you get the preservation of some of those delicate aromatics. But what I also see here is I do see a little bit of a dark core of blue fruit mixed in with some brambly red fruit as well, which I think is part of the Southwest aspect and sort of the warmer winds that tend to bring out darker blue fruited flavors in Pinot Noir throughout the Willamette Valley.
I mean, the site is so unique. What I love about when I walked this vineyard was that you really do feel like you're exclusively sort of on your own little island of vineyard amongst the mountains and the Doug fir forest. And even though you're surrounded by vines, you're more greatly surrounded by forest and by higher elevation mountain ranges. And so it does feel incredibly distinctive within the Willamette Valley itself. And I feel like that some of that aromatics and the juiciness and liveliness is coming from that proximity to the foothills and to the ocean influence there as well. Would you say that's true?
Yes, I would say that's true. But one thing that I would like to leave with everyone before this conversation is over is the defining flavor and aromatic of this soil type on Pinot Noir specifically is graphite. I've never seen any other AVA or any other soil type under any circumstances in my career produce graphite naturally through the fruit. And this vineyard consistently does it across all blocks, across all clones, throughout the vineyard. And I can see it in some whites on occasion, but interestingly, the whites are usually Pinot Gris and Pinot Blanc and other genetic variations of Pinot Noir. And it's very distinctive in a way that I think is probably for me a stronger marker on these wines than I've seen any other generalized marker that people discuss from Dundee Hills or from Ribbon Ridge. It's very pronounced, very strong pencil lead characteristic.
Yeah, it is, and that's almost what you see in the mid palate. There is that's what you're left with, this really long line of yeah, like pastel lead pencil on the mid palate, with all the florals and red fruit hanging around that sort of core. It's almost like an inversion of the Chardonnay to some extent, the way that it sits in your mouth, the profile here. Any of these, the vines that are going into this winemaker's cuvee, the David Hill Estate has a pretty historic place in Oregon wine, and the vineyard here was planted in the mid 60s and was one of the first plantings in the Willamette Valley, and is still all own rooted and phylloxera free for these old vines. What about the clonal material? Is clonal material important here?
For me, clonal material is always important, and I think clonal material is actually more important than soil. I think in some cases, some genetic material is so powerful that I'd rather have it on the valley floor than up on a really nice steep hillside, and I would produce a better wine. So I think all things are important, but I do believe genetic material is much more important than most people give credit. You know, I can train as hard as I want and run as fast as I can and eat whatever I can possibly eat, but I'm not going to be in the Olympics if my DNA doesn't prepare me for it, right? We have limitations. So I think here, one of the things is the vineyard is actually a bit of a mystery. The man, Charles Corey, originally planted this, and a couple of other families who have owned this over the years. The documentation wasn't spectacular. And a lot of the vines here were produced with cuttings off of the property instead of purchasing from other nurseries. And so there really wasn't a whole lot of documentation or record keeping. So we know a good bit. We've been doing a lot of DNA testing to try to sort everything out, but there are things that are in the vineyard that are unidentified. The particular wine that we're drinking right now is from an identified block of Pommard. We do believe that it was one of the original available Pommard selections that was available at UC Davis at the time, which was planted also by Dickie Rath, one of the other original 1960s vineyard pioneers. So we think this is the original Pommard selection that was essentially brought up from California, and also Wadensville. And the Wadensville here in this particular case is 1A. There's a Wadensville 1A and a Wadensville 2A. This one, which is 1A, is a little bit thinner skinned. It's a little bit higher yielding, but it's incredibly floral and delicate and aromatic. And I believe that the florals and the freshness, the perfume that you're seeing here with the high tones is actually from the Wadensville. And the Pommard is wanting to be much more sanguine. It's sort of very rustically charming in a way and has a lot of earthy notes to it, in addition to sort of more brambly berries, but brings more of the structure and the tautness to the palate. There are also some newer selections of the Dijon clones that came in here into the 1980s as well, because the actual most recent planting was in 1995. So the youngest vines on the property are 25 years old. So there are some newer developments of clone material as well. And so one of the things I really love about working here, and I think I really love in the wines, is that it's a bit of a museum. It's a time capsule. We have both the first generation and the second generation reflected here. And now the farm is owned and operated by a third generation family member, which is incredible. And the farm continues to evolve with new material over the next 5 to 10 years.
So we've got a couple of questions specifically about the winemaking. Stem inclusion?
There is no stem inclusion here.
And why is that?
Well, it just happened to be the way that the blend worked out. So to be honest, in 2019, this is my very first vintage working here. with David Hill. This is the very first wine, basically Pinot Noir, that I've been able to bottle and showcase. And so learning the vineyard sites, I was very selective, fermenting blocks in micro batches to understand and try to accelerate my knowledge of the fruit expression of the property. And there are some selections and cuvées that we've bottled that do have a significant amount or even small amounts of whole cluster influence, but this particular one did not. And I believe that what I saw was the older vines were very stubborn and they just didn't prefer it. There seemed to be so much nuance and delicacy and non-fruit sort of like tertiary complexity being expressed through the berries themselves that I felt like the whole cluster sort of made the wines a little more stylized and a little bit less expressive of the old vines and soil. So I left it out in this vintage.
Okay, and the only other question that's a little more fun, and considering the history of this site and that it already has 16 or 17 different varieties planted to it, there's a question from Michael Dolinsky that asks, with the Los and the big diurnal shift, any thoughts of Gruner Veltliner being planted here?
Yeah, so I've worked with Gruner Veltliner for a decade, and I've worked with it across 4 vineyard sites throughout the Willamette Valley. And I feel, yes, absolutely, it would thrive here for sure. I would probably try to keep it on a Western aspect just to make sure that the skins really got developed correctly all the way through, because Gruner Veltliner is incredibly thick-skinned. In my experience, it's as thick-skinned as Cabernet Sauvignon or almost any other red grape variety I've worked with, and it's incredibly important that it gets a lot of sunlight in order for the tannins and the phenolics to develop correctly in the skins. In addition, to address the Los question, the Los soils bring a pronounced amount of tannin to anything grown on them, not in the way that you would see in Ribbon Ridge, for example, where the tannins are very coarse, sort of like they're larger, sort of chunky, rustic sort of tannins. The tannins here are very chalky, but in a very intense way that can create a lot of dry extract on the palate. And I think that it would be just doubling down again on making sure that the tannin development and the skins are fully developed, that the Gruner would want to have a good amount of sun exposure.
Okay, I'm going to leave it there because we've got a lot of wines to get through. Thank you.
Thank you, Bree.
And we are going to move into the Columbia Gorge AVA, and I'd like to welcome Stephen Thompson from Analemma. Hi, Stephen. Thanks for being here.
It's my pleasure, Bree, and thank you all for your interest in the Unexplored Oregon class today.
Stephen, can you tell us a little bit about the Columbia Gorge AVA? I know that there's probably many people who haven't heard of it, maybe don't know what kind of varieties it grows, and don't know about its extreme diversity in climate and sites.
Yeah, you're exactly right. It's the Columbia Gorge AVA it's an incredibly exciting place to live and grow grapes and make wine. It sits within a national scenic area and has 4 really distinct seasons. It's relatively young at only 17 years old, but it's home to a few of the Pacific Northwest's OG vineyards, that have greater than 50 years of age on them.
Yeah, is it the Pines that has the like 1850s or 1880s Zinfandel?
That's right. Yeah, the Pines. That's just over in the Dalles, so it's on the eastern edge of the AVA. That's exactly right. Yeah, and so the gorge is a bi-state AVA encompassing Washington and Oregon, and it straddles the Columbia River. And the Columbia River is a large enough body of water that influences the area, the local mesoclimate, with direct benefits to the agricultural regions and orchards that are here. The river itself is one of the only gaps through the whole Cascade Range. And so, like Ken and Chad already spoke about, winds and climate play a really big part in growing with the vineyards and the grapes. And so here in the gorge, that gap between the mountains allows the maritime influence to come in through the cooling effect and moisture. And so that creates a situation here where we have constant cooling breezes in the summertime. And that's why this area is the windsurfing capital of the US too, as a testament to that. And like you mentioned, that the Columbia Gorge is small AVA, but it's big in diversity. And that's primarily due to the three elements of elevation and then precip and soil types. So vineyards within this area lie from right at the river's edge at about 300 feet, all the way up to 2,000 feet, which is a real alpine environment that's covered in snow 3 months out of the year. The precipitation varies wildly, and on the western edge and higher elevations, it can also be about 45 inches of rain, like Chad mentioned. And on the east side, it goes down to about 12 inches. So it's a really dramatic rain shadow effect. And that gradient also reflects growing degree days. So we have much fewer growing degree days on the western higher elevation sites than we do on the lower elevation that are more east. And finally, the soil types. So the story about terroir here needs to start with the Missoula flood conversation. And as the Missoula floods came through the gorge, the body of water was about 1,000 feet deep. So that's roughly the demarcation line between vineyards that are planted below 1,000 feet are influenced by those Missoula floods. So cobbles, sands, glacial erratics, the large ones like the size of the cars that Ken was talking about. And then the elevation above 1,000 feet is all volcanic origin. So these are on the foothills of Mount Hood and Mount Adams, respectively. And those are a little bit heavier clay, ash, loam soils, and generally dry farmed. All of these variables allow for a really wide range of varietals to be grown. And following this gradient, I've been speaking about the cooler wines, the sparkling wines like, well, Riesling and Gewürztraminer and Gruner that was spoken about. They do really well on the western and higher elevation. And then as you move down into the east, it's really nice for Burgundian varietals of Chardonnay and Pinot. A little bit further east, you'll start to see Syrah, Merlot, some Mondoux, Mencia, Godello, a lot of different varietals coming to existence. And then further east is warm enough for Zinfandel, Sangiovese, Nebbiolo, and the like.
Yeah, it's such an amazingly diverse area. I love visiting it because I never know what I'm going to discover at the next winery that I stop into. And, you know, it's like, oh, you're going for mint? Okay, well, where did that come from? And yeah, Mondoux and Mencia and Stephen, you planted a lot of these Spanish varietals at your site in the Mosier Hills, right? I know we've got the Ganache or the Grenache today. But you're really playing around with a lot of those Spanish varietals and different training methods as well in your vineyard.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. So together with my partner, Chris Vade, we co-founded Analemma in 2010. And we intentionally created it as a grower-producer model based around regenerative agriculture. So many of you are likely familiar with the French term vigneron. That represents a wine grower who is actively present in all aspects of the production, particularly pruning and the vineyard work and the tractor driving or horse plowing, whatever it might be, to the cellar work and sales and today even Zoom calls. Yeah, we're a small team that are dedicated to this style of farming. We operate a property that is very diverse with sweet cherry orchards, vineyards, cows, pastures, lavender that you can see in the picture, veggies and wild areas. And we wanted to add to the diversity of the gorge. And we drew inspiration from the region within the northwestern part of Spain, Galicia. And to that end, we were inspired because that's another transitional zone from kind of a Western cooling influence and an Eastern warming influence. And so we did, like you mentioned, planted some of the first cuttings in America of Mencia, and Godeo's included in that, and Maranzao or Trousseau. And today we're excited to share the Grenache, which is also a very big part of Spanish wine identity. And we farm 3 acres. This block of Grenache is about 3 acres of head-trained vines on a steep south-facing slope.
Why
And
head-trained?
So, oh yeah, great question. Head-trained allows it allows for a more 3-dimensional aspect, and part of the steep slope prohibited some of the wires and trellising, but also the way you had to drive the tractor down the slope turned the vines to where if it was just a plain, it might get sunburned on the western side. And so the 3-dimensional allows for a little shading as well as reduced yields to increase the concentration. And
do you have any trouble ripening Grenache or Mencia here in the hills?
That's a great question. And I think it's, it's all subjective. We are at the western edge of, I think we're probably some of the most western vineyards that have Grenache planted. It's generally out a little bit further east. And we receive plenty of sunshine on these blocks for this yield to ripen basically year in and year out. Grenache, it demands a little bit longer season, so it's some of the latest grapes that we harvest. But I think this wine has a beautiful floral and lifted sense, and kind of more feminine characteristics.
That's exactly what I was going to say. There's just so much, perfume and freshness of fruit to it as well, that it's quite distinctive for a lot of the other Grenache that we see around the state, and north and south of the state as well. And it's probably one of the, most elegant styles of Grenache that I've seen, with that, it's got, again, that Oregon vibrancy to it, but it's so much perfume and elegance and delicateness as well.
Yeah, exactly right. I think the energy and the lightness and the freshness and the acidities that are present in this wine are a characteristic of many wines through the region. And as you're exploring in this class, Oregon is just a really nice, cool climate that is able to retain those acidities. And I know Grenache is often associated with Chateauneuf-du-Pape, and rightfully so. But this wine differs in the comparison that it just has a little bit more of a drier finish and lacks some of that sweetness or unctuous that you might find in a warmer climate.
Yeah, it doesn't have much of that sort of more raisined or baked fruit character to it. It's definitely more, just ripe summer fruits and that vibrancy coming through as well, and almost like an alpine Grenache,
It is. I think those are great descriptors, and part of the way or the stylistic choices we make in the wine process. For one, we're willing to harvest generally earlier on in that physiological ripeness window in the vineyard, and we incorporate a generous amount of stem inclusion, so whole clusters in the ferment. And I think both of those play into this, the aromas that we're getting and the lift and the freshness.
Yeah, and a little bit of that dryness on the palate, that sort of herbal dryness that's coming through right at the back, which is, lovely. There's not an oak presence. It's more of that refined, sappy stem presence or dried herb presence. That's, quite distinctive.
And I know a lot of the audience might be curious about the oak program, and as we've talked about it in other wines, and in this particular one, we raise this wine in larger vessels, so 700 liter and 600 liter sized vessels, some of it being concrete and others being just older wood.
Really to preserve that freshness of fruit and the transparency of site and place there as well.
Speaking about site and place, on the label, that our symbol is is a custom rendition of the actual analemma that occurs in the sky. So everywhere in the world has its own analemma. And so just like a wine, it's kind of a fingerprint of place, and that particular part of it is really important, and that's what we try to strive to do when we create the wines, is a sense of place that's here.
Thank you, Stephen. I think that really does show a sense of place and vibrancy that the gorge brings to all the wines grown there, and it's a really elegant and beautiful style of Grenache. So thank you very much. And why Grenache and not Garnacha?
Oh, it could be. One day we'll see. But for right now, we have a lot of different varietals coming on, and so familiarity is a good thing on the sales side.
Yeah, that's for sure. Thanks, Stephen. Okay, let's move now into the Southern Oregon region, and traveling south, we're traveling at the end of the Willamette Valley. We move from the town of Eugene and into the large Southern Oregon AVA. It's over 2.5 million acres, and it's really divided into a north-south Southern Oregon. At the northern end, we have the Umpqua Valley, which tends to be a little bit more maritime influenced and high elevation. And then the Rogue Valley in the south is a little more based around river valleys, but high elevation sites still. So two very distinctive regions that grow very distinctive and different varieties from each other. And today we have Dyson Damara from one of the oldest post-prohibition winery in Oregon, Hillcrest, and his 2013 Malbec. And so this is an aged wine that Dyson makes very distinctively from these 60-year-old vines. So I'm going to welcome Dyson to talk to us about the vineyard and the region. Thanks for joining us, Dyson.
It's my pleasure, and thanks to everybody for their time and thoughts. And it's a modern wonder to be able to touch this many people, both with our words as well as our wines. Absolutely.
And I'm wondering, actually, a quick poll out there. Who knew that the Oregon wine industry was 60 years old this year? And also, who knew that Oregon grew Malbec and it was one of its oldest vines? I'm wondering if anyone's coming in on the chat. Okay, so David Nershi says yes to both. Okay, so we've got some Oregon geeks out there. So Dyson, you've got your hands full. Go for it.
Oh, fantastic! I'll tell you, if they can teach me something, great. So a little bit about kind of how we arrived here, and also Umpqua Valley. Quickly, just to put things in perspective. My wife and I took over from the father of Oregon wine, Richard Summers, in 2003. And he was the first modern pioneer really to come north, a graduate of Davis, and he was being told it was too cold, too wet, of course, in Oregon. And he ended up in Umpqua Valley. And there were some earlier pioneers, which were the Dorners, which had built cooperage, the old cooperage in the tunnels that have fallen in at Beringer, Napa Valley, actually immigrated to the Roseburg, or what's now Umpqua Valley, in 1888 and planted a vineyard that's still there in existence and had a winery up until 1965. So when Richard came up, he'd gone to Old Man Louis Martini at Stanley Ranch down in Carneros, who had about a 60-acre plot of all kinds of alternative varieties. And those varieties would have included, Chardonnay, of which there was very little in California. Merlot, I think, was under like 100 acres at that point. And he went to him and said, look, I'm going to Oregon. I know that there's some grapes that are grown there pre-prohibition. I want to kind of play with a lot of things. I believe in Pinot Noir and Riesling, that is at that point was the most expensive wines in the world, the great German Rieslings. And that was the model, but he wanted to play with other things. So he got 33 other varieties from Old Man Louis Martini and planted them, and included in that were things such as Carignan, Tokai, Barbera, Tintacao. So there's a mixture of all kinds of things that supposedly a lot of this plant material came out of the Sierra foothills, where there were some old, just post-prohibition plantings as part of a research project at the University of California, Berkeley. Anyway, he brought those up. I think the Pinot Noir history, Hillcrest is the first place to ever plant and produce Pinot Noir, and this is the 60th anniversary of that planting. But one of the things that Richard did was to play with these alternative varieties. And when we took over, I asked him many, many times, I said, hey, if you were to plant 3 varieties again outside of Pinot Noir and Riesling that were proven to be super successful, what would they be? And Richard always said Malbec, Malbec, and Malbec. And that was something that kind of rang with me. And I love the wines of Cahora. I have a background at Pine Ridge and Mondavi and Napa Valley, and we've worked in Europe and Asia and South America in the wine business, my wife and I, and that was something that we wanted to plant. Well, we took and we tried to resuscitate as much of the old vineyard as possible. Of course, it was unrooted, anything planted in 61. And Malbec was one thing that early on was actually quite stunning from a very, very early stage. And it's, to the point today, it's actually one of our primary wines. We have 3 different areas of Umpqua Valley that are planted to Malbec, all hillside. We do 100% dry farm, no adjuncts in winemaking. We'll talk about that a little bit. If you've ever been, and I have very few people, we travel both domestically and internationally, and very few people have been to Oregon. We find on the road sometimes, let alone to Umpqua Valley. If you've ever been to Russian River, you've been to Umpqua Valley. If somebody blindfolded you and dropped you there, you'd think you're on the River Road if you're standing at Hillcrest. So we have a very high ridge of conifers to the west that falls off, and it's a lot of sedimentary soils where we are, which is kind of a mesa of what's fallen off. You can see in the very background there, that's a 2,600-foot ridge, and we're on an 850-foot mesa where you see the fruit. It falls off to a valley floor of 450 feet. We have a river that comes in, which is where our cold air intrusion is. And that cold air comes in. We have, according to Greg Jones, the greatest diurnal difference of any area in America. So we see massive swings back and forth. And much like Russian River, we have very, very, very little flatland. If you look at the Umpqua Valley, we're like northern Italy, where over 75% of the landscape is mountains and hills. And it's one of the primary reasons there hadn't been a lot of exploration by well-known wineries coming into the area, because there's very, very little flatland. Soil types, we have more soil types than any fine wine region in the world at 150. And as part of Mondavi, we would go around the world and talk about the 30 plus in Napa Valley, 150 different soil types. With that 75% mountains and hills, or what we call the 100 valleys of the Umpqua, it's like facets on a diamond. I mean, the variation is fantastic. And because of that, we tend to draw, we have a, modern history, once again, that goes back to 61, but we tend to draw kind of the explorer class of winemaker, dreamer, grape grower. We have, I think Oregon has a little over 80 varieties. In Umpqua Valley, we have 82 varieties now just in one area, and we're at about 3,500 acres of vineyard currently. And so you have wineries that focus on Spanish varieties. Most wineries do a mix of everything. Some have some Austrian varieties. Of course, a lot of French, a lot of Pinot Noir in the area, which is more Pomardish than you might find in the Willamette Valley. But Bordeaux varieties, I have a background in and love all fine wines. So we play with that, and probably the latest and greatest are the Italian varietals, and we explore that. I produced Teraldigo, we have Frasia in the ground, Sangiovese, Barbera, of course, I've made for about 10, 15 years now. And so it's very much a playground. There's a difference in, Bree kind of spoke about this. If you look at Southern Oregon as an appellation, there's huge, huge, huge range within it. There's the North and the South. The North being, actually, that's so different that the Department of Forestry has 2 very different units that look at these, because one is much more continental. As you move from the south end of Umpqua Valley to the Rogue Valley to the south, continental climate becomes more dominant, whereas where we are, we see a range much more, about 85% of our weather comes off the coast. And so with that little bit of what's in the south there, we tend to get what I call baby fat fruit typically, which is super kind of fat, saturated, sweet fruit that I associate with north coast of California. And that was something we were looking for. My wife and I sold a vineyard winery we had in the Atlas Peak area of Napa Valley, and we're looking for a place to do Pinot Noir. And after 4 years of looking around the world, ended up at Hillcrest. My truths, and I think more and more we see this, I think in the discussion today, is, less is better. And I like to say good wines taste like a grape, great wines taste like a place. And so the Malbec that you're tasting, so the first Malbec made in Oregon in modern times was 1964 by Richard Summers. And unfortunately, I don't have any of that to pour you, but or myself for that matter. This is a wine, I think, I oftentimes hear a lot about biodynamic and natural farming, and then you go inside of a winery and we'll hear that there are adjuncts in that use. And to me, it's all one and the same. If you're having minimal impact in the vineyard, it's equally as important to respect that fruit and not alter chemistry inside the winery. We use 0 adjuncts. And I have a rule like the German brewing law of Reinheitsgebot of 1516, that unless it was used 100 years ago, I don't use it. And so out of this, many ideas have come. The wine you're tasting is fermented in concrete. I started in 2004 producing my own concrete tanks after having spent some time working in the Rhone with a producer of concrete tanks. And I do very traditional, bring fruit in. This is 100% destemmed and crushed. This is put into concrete tanks and on total skins for about 50 days. So you'll see a very different phenolic profile. The wine is racked, and something that I want to do is as an artist, really one of the hardest things is that the longer you're in something, the more the blinders come up. And I think that's one thing that the great producers do is you can always peel back and you can kind of look at things with a fresh sense. So we do that inside the winery. And one of the things that we asked ourselves when we were in Cahors was many of the modern wines versus some of the traditional producers, there's just a huge difference. And I'm sure many of you know that, Cahors and Mataron, by law, those wines were 4 years in barrel, 1 year in bottle before they could be released as such. And, many areas of the world today, now the rules might be 10 months in a barrel and that's it. And so how does that alter the evolution of a wine? And so the wine that you're tasting is the first wine that we had done this to, that this wine is 5 years pre-bottling. So it's brought in fermented, left on the skins for an extended maceration, pressed. It's in 10 barrels, 2 of which were once used barrels. So it has a very light fingerprint of wood on it. But then this wine is aged 2 years in tank and then bottled. And what I was trying to do is to take, a little bit of thinking about like Piemonte and this, and my daughter worked for a great producer there, Finocchio, and where they'll do like 90 days on skins and of course 4 years in Bodie, large cooperage, and to see what that would do. And so this wine, the barrels that it went into are smaller, 60-gallon traditional barrique size than that, but stainless aged. And to me, there's 2 signals. Part of this is it's very different than the other Malbecs we produce because we do a lot of extended aging of 2 or 3 years in barrel or in maybe 1,500 liter cask now or Botti. But this wine tastes like it's from a different place to me. And this is the effect of hands-off traditional winemaking. So this wine, in the aromatics, there's something that's kind of the hillcrest smell and flavor, and I wish I could tell you where it comes from, but there's almost like a balsam. I get like a mulberry, like this beautiful kind of elderberry fruit to it, kind of intertwined with a little bit of like that leaf character. You get that real sweet, almost on the edge of mint. There's a little bit of smoky, a little bit of tobacco after the wine sat in the glass for me a little bit. But in the mouth, when I taste this wine, wine has architecture. And I think that's one of the greatest things, both in terms of how you grow, like 100% of what we do is hillside and dry farming, is you can alter, almost like you take a ball of clay or a sculptor would take a ball of clay, you can stretch it, squish it, pull it, whatever you want to do. You can take wines, the natural ingredient, you can kind of shape shift it. And this wine to me, actually, if somebody served this to me blind in the mouth, is much more like a wine out of northern Italy, like Piemontese red. You get this very gentle, kind of broad, sweet fruit. There's a transparency to it. There's a tannin to it that's super fine that really doesn't feel a lot like Malbec tannin that's typically, to me, a little bit more kind of chunky, chewy in character. This fragility, but yet this elegance is something that, it belongs to the human element. And so that is as equal a part of terroir as the nature, is the ability of a culture to kind of take and instill their thoughts and their beliefs and their way upon something, of course, without stepping on it. And I say good wines taste like a grape, great wines taste like a place. So I want to manifest this, but this is a different way of me presenting almost that strawberry by itself. You know,
Yeah.
it's just plating the fruit and making something super, super elegant.
It does have that really lovely resolved tannins. And when I first smelt it and put it in my mouth, the first place I went as well was Northern Italy. But then when you walk through the vineyards down in the Umpqua, you get that sort of sagebrush and spruce and balsam and all of those, you know, almost dried woods, eastern woods spices coming out, and that sort of just encompasses that, despite having that, you know, sort of Italianate winemaking style as well. It's a fascinating wine, and it's everyone's talking about lamb chops in the chat, and I have to definitely say that that's what I'm having tonight for dinner with this glass of wine.
Yeah. It's a beautiful thing to be able to pioneer, and I think there's so many things, you know, having worked especially at Mondavi, that did fantastic amounts of research. It's once again, we're blinded at Mondavi. We looked at traditional, you know, you look at the Tokalon project and going back to large oak cooperage, these kind of things, the concrete, there are a lot of things to be learned by the history of fine wine production. And I really think, you know, post-prohibition, people had to make clean wine. So the technology was not only got rid of the virtues, but the flaws, but it got rid of the virtues as well. And I think that, you know, in the vineyards, we do a better job, but inside the winery, more and more hands off to really allow things to express themselves. But, you know, doing, you know, Henri Jaillet in Burgundy above the cellar door said the trick is there are no tricks. And making, you know, not doing something is equally stylistic.
Yeah,
as doing
absolutely.
a lot. And so that's kind of my fingerprint is hands off, no hands.
I love it. Well, we've had a ton of comments in there, and if you have time as well, Dyson, jump in there and chat more about Malbec, like how many producers are growing Malbec in the Umpqua, and there's a bunch of questions in there, but we've got to keep moving to get through the last two wines, which are both Syrahs. So thank you for being here, Dyson. We really appreciate it, and happy anniversary. Happy 60 years.
I'm just a few years behind that myself, so thank you. Cheers to everyone, and thank you.
Cheers. JP, I'm going to bring you up now. And if everyone has their two clean glasses or two glasses in front of them, it's probably a good idea to put these two Syrahs in the glass in front of you. And we have JP Villa from Vulcan Cellars. Welcome, JP.
Thank you, Lee. How are you?
I am doing great. Can you tell us a little bit about the Rogue Valley and how you ended up in the Rogue Valley making wine and making Syrah as well, knowing that you are from Argentina? You do make a great Malbec as well, by the way, but can you tell us a little bit about the Rogue Valley and the growing conditions down there and why it's so well suited to these Rhone varieties?
Of course. I have a sort of pitch, but after hearing all these guys talking, it's just like I got so much information right now. So I'll start with the first time that we met, that I met with the Valley, and that was go back to 2001. I was hired by a winery here in the Willamette Valley from Argentina, so they brought me up here, and I was working in the lab, and with the guy that was my boss back there, Derek, he said, "Hey, dude, we got something very interesting for you if you want to take a look." And I was taking bricks, daily bricks, back in that time. I said, "Well, what is it?" I said, "Well, we just have a Malbec." And I said, "Wow, Malbec here? Yeah, well, okay, I'll go check." So I got my whole list of tank that I gotta check on bricks. And especially this one, normally it say TK, which is for tank. This one, you have a TK, you have a TR. So I go look for it, and I'm like, just looking around, didn't find it. So I go back and say, dude, I can't find it. So where is the one? So what it means TR? So TR means trash can. I said, okay, let's, so, and first time in the US, and my English not being so well, so I thought it was a joke, but actually The Malbec was in a trash can, which is not trash can for trash, but it's the trash can that they use when you have a small amount of grapes. So they brought almost 200 pounds of Malbec from the Rogue Valley. And I just want to mention that because 2001 is when the Rogue Valley became an official AVA. So it's been 19 or 20 years this year. So the first introduction, so it wasn't love at the first sight, but actually I saw a lot of potential after we actually ferment Malbec in there. So moving on, I got hired by another wineries and I got to work with Syrah, which is from the Italian area, which I love it. Not so much the style, but later on with different approach that came out with what I would like for my style. So I made wine for another winery, which is with Silvan Ridge in the Willamette Valley. I'm the head winemaker there, and I started my own business in the 2012, but we didn't launch any of the wines until the 17. So we were selling wines to different wineries in order to come up with the money to support this project, which is the Balkan Cellar. So the Balkan is VAL for Valo and CAM, my wife's last name, Cancel. So it's my wife and me and this one. And this is our kind of a legacy for our kids. We got 2 kids. So back to the Rogue Valley. Rogue is one of the southern, most southern area in the Oregon, so border with California. So the valley is, I believe, is 70 miles wide by 60 miles long, so it's wider than north. The important part about that is also is composed by 3 different valleys, which is the Bear Creek, the Illinois, and Applegate. So you have a big variety of different climates and microclimates, the same like soils. And I like that because if you're making it, you can find many different varieties, but on the same variety, depending if you are east or west, you can find, you can make a different style of wine on the same variety. Mm-hmm. So if you go to the west side, you get cooler and cooler temperature at night, which is actually more acidity, more dry acidity, natural acidity. But if you go to the west side, you start getting warmer and less acidity per se. So if you are one of the guys like myself that I don't like to manipulate much of the wine, so I'm more minimalistic. And I think like many of the other winemakers have been also talking more hands-off, no hands. I think that's what Dyson said, which actually I love it. So I'm on this wine that I made this Syrah from one single vineyard. It's called the Belmont Vineyard. It's on the Bear Creek. It's on clay soil, and it's BSP. So vertical shoot position. Which is not that common in the Rogue Valley to find BSP. So mostly is they like more of the double canopy, the Scott Henry. I like the BSP because also there's more lower yields per acre, and also some areas they don't need to irrigate, or if they have to irrigate, they don't need to do it that often. So this vineyard, the Syrah is clone 1, and on the rootstock is water 110. So they have to irrigate twice. So July, August, which is probably the hottest part of the month of the year. And I like that. I think I like the concentration, and I like they said before, the roots explore a little bit more. Also depend on the rootstock that you're using, but I like that, and they get more balance to the wine. Let's say the clay soil also have more potassium, which actually transfer that into the uptake for the vine. So you get a little higher pH. I like that because they give me more flexibility on the part of if I want to actually do ml, 100% ml, halfway ml. So just to compare, if you do Pinot Noir, if you don't do ML, full ML, you end up with a really dry acidity Pinot. So I like the idea of the balance, and I like that I have as a tool. So it will depend up to me. The vineyard was planted back in 2008.
JP, the acidity normally down in this area is pretty severe as well. So that pH gives that nice sweetness and roundness in the mid palate as well, which I find in this glass, it gives the, the nice full-bodied mouthfeel, but there's still so much brightness and acidity on the fruit as well, and freshness. And are you using any whole cluster in here, or are you avoiding that because of the pH issue?
No, actually, we're using 10%. So
10%.
Yeah, and it's easier to sort, and so we go faster. So basically, my brain is kind of my lab, and I think that I want to try that. I probably I'll have to go through the owner of the wine if I want to try new things. So this is the one. So starting with a new approach on my wines, and balance is being what I want to achieve. This one even is 14.8% alcohol, which is really high, but you don't feel it. I don't feel it. I don't think it's hard at all. So the balance in the wine is the important part. So it's 100% Syrah, 20% New Oak. Spent 2 years in barrel, and then almost a year and a half in the bottle before actually went to the market. And unfortunately, this one is gone. So I saved the last 5 cases, and I'm keeping those. So this one also, this is my second Syrah on my portfolio. So I've been making more Syrah. I made some Syrah also when I was in Argentina. I said like also Malbec and many other ones. So one of the things that actually is a plus for the Rogue Valley is all the microclimate that I'm talking about, because you can grow so many different varieties. I mean, you name it, they will have it. Some will be growing if we can afford it to get it, or if it's available, it's another thing. But there's so many varieties growing there. I think that's for kind of an issue for them, because on the identity for the Rogue Valley, they haven't found a grape that actually will be the flagship, comparing to the Willamette Valley with Pinot Noir. The next producer will be from the Milton Freeway, which is they're pretty known for also for Syrah. So one of the wines that actually perform, or one of the grapes that actually perform very well down south is Syrah. I also think is Malbec. It will be probably next. We're one of the biggest producers of Malbec as well. I've been rooting for that grape since I left Argentina. And I see some of the comments, actually, they always compare Malbec to Argentina. And it's true. I mean, literally, it's not the same. I don't think we're pretending to be Argentina, like we're not pretending to be Bordeaux or Burgundy. We're trying to pretend we want to be Oregon, we want to be the Willamette Valley, we want to be the Rogue Valley, the Umpqua Valley. So we were looking for our own identity. And like been said before, we want to make wines that are with a sense of place. And Syrah is a little tougher because it's more like a winemaker wine that you actually can influence whatever you want and come out with so many different styles. So on the same variety with many different styles.
Yeah, it's really interesting, the different styles of grapes that can be grown down in the Rogue Valley. And I'm always surprised that, you head up the Applegate River and you're on all of these little bench lands of alluvial, little gravels and granites. And, you have, Grenache growing next to Syrah, next to Tempranillo, next to Vermentino, next to Merlot. But then you move further east into the Bear Creek valleys, and you start to get more of these, open open plains and clays and sandy soils. And the way that the palate changes for the ripeness levels, you know, the Applegate River has that real river wind and movement influence, and the mountains overshadowing the vineyards, you know, and so aspect is really important in the Applegate River Valley. And then when you go east towards the Bear Creek Valley a little more, you just have that a little bit more exposure and a little bit more of the elements, and you tend to feel that in the wines when they come out as well. And so I find that, you know, I tend to gravitate a little more towards some of the Bordeaux and Malbec varieties that are over in the Bear Creek area, and some more of the Rhone varieties that are closer to the Applegate River area. But it's such a region of exploration, and it's just super exciting to have it so close to Portland and to San Francisco. It's a really, you know, accessible region and absolutely stunning region as well. So
yeah,
anyone who's close should visit.
we just so you know, we actually had the winery in the Willamette Valley, southern Willamette Valley. So we are 4 hours away from the vineyard. So just to go see the grapes, it takes a full day. But yeah. I love it. I think it's it reminds me sometimes some of the higher elevation areas in Mendoza. It's a cool climate still, so you get more green that you will see in the Andes. So the area that I'm talking about is at the full hill of the Andes. So there's not much growing there, so you need a lot of water. So what I think actually some of these wines will become, with at least with Mendoza, is that as soon as they go more higher elevation, they will get into a more cool climate. So these are the cool climate varieties that actually we try to showcase in this case. And I think they're great. So I mean, I could be biased since I've been working with this grape for the last 15 years. But I love it. I think it's just I get to try so many different wines. Not to compare different areas. So wines are wines, and if you like it, you don't like it, that's a different thing. But these are great potential. I mean, they just the wine. This wine is 5 years old, and it has a. Since we're on the west side, on the east side, like I said, so you have a more complexity on aromas and flavors. So I just bring some of the comments that actually some of them from cola, and there's a lot of berries, red berries. So there's a lot of plants. So it's just, and if you let it actually breathe a little more, it will open up. And some of what you get on the nose, you also get in the mouthfeel. And what I like the most, actually, this wine is the kind of the silkiness that takes you with a long aftertaste, long finish. And I think that's probably the what I like to work all the time is just to get more. So you swallow and you keep getting more and more, and that can invite you to get another sip and another sip, invite another sip, and then by the time that you think about it, you just got the glass.
Well, that's the beauty of Oregon wines, JP, is the freshness. You know, you've got the silkiness, the fruit, and the freshness that makes you want to keep drinking them. That's the beauty of Oregon. Cheers. I'm going to bring up now Bilo Naravain. Thanks, JP. But we might have you back on just to, you know, talk about the comparisons between these two Syrahs as well. And also there's questions in the chat and the Q&A if you want to jump in there as well. I know Kylie Evans is in there. Thanks, Kylie, for being here, and he's answering a lot of questions in there.
I'll be ready when you want me.
Thank you. Thanks, JP. Bilo, are you still out there?
I am here. Hi, Bree.
Awesome. Hi. Welcome. And to Paul Greggett's question earlier on, yes, we are claiming back Walla Walla since most of the vineyard plantings are on the Oregon side. But just because of the archaic laws for AVAs in Oregon, most of the wines are actually made on the Walla Walla side because that's where the production facilities are, which is why you don't see any AVA designated Oregon Walla Walla wines coming out of the Oregon side, because Oregon, if you take Oregon grapes out of the state, you can only label them as Oregon wine. So we're hopefully changing that, right?
That's correct. So we have filed a petition to change it because it is a little silly, because my vineyards are literally 7 miles from the winery across the state side. I bring them over to Walla Walla in Washington, where my winery is, and I have to declassify from Rocks District to the broader AVA, Walla Walla Valley. So yes, it is a bit silly. With the Rocks District, I would just like to have a few key takeaways for all of you. One is that this is a really, really small AVA, right? Some of the other AVAs that we've discussed are in the 2 million acres, million acre, 100,000. The Rocks District is really a 3,700 acres, 3,770. And what we did was in 2012, a few of our growers and stuff, we kind of got together and said, this is such a unique area and character for terroir. We wanted to have its own AVA. And Steve Robertson is really the one that kind of spearheaded this effort. So Steve and I talked, and I said, what would be the absolute most interesting is to try to define this AVA solely without political considerations, without personal considerations. Let's just map it out on a very specific soil type, and that's it. So we talked to the local geologist here, Dr. Kevin Pogue, and he thought that was a great idea. So we quite literally had Dr. Pogue walk the perimeter of this Rocks District AVA now. And where it was this singular rock basalt terroir, that was included. Where it wasn't, it was not included. So this is pretty much the only AVA in the entire world that is defined by one singular soil type. This free water series of basalt cobbles. So that's, I think, what makes it super, super unique. To date, only about 10% or a little less than 9% of the acreage has been planted. As Bree pointed out, this is also a peculiar situation because the Rocks District, even though it's in the broader Walla Walla AVA, it resides entirely on the Oregon side in Milton Freewater. How do we get all of these cobblestones in this area, right? And the cobblestones are roughly the size of a baseball or softball, kind of in that range, right? So basically throughout the history, we've had this Missoula flood events repeated times, right? We know at least 35 of these events have happened in the past 50,000 years. And they would bring, as other speakers have mentioned, this incredible raging wall of water, right? 1,000 feet deep in many, many cases, right? So this entire area would have been completely covered and underwater. And they deposited a lot of these rocks in the Blue Mountains. And then subsequently, the Walla Walla River, as it kind of goes through Milton Freewater, it loses its gradient and kind of hits this open area, and the velocity of that water slows down. So as it carries all these cobblestones, it's no longer able to carry them, and it deposits them.
Billo, we just lost you.
Oops, am I back?
I have Billo.
You can hear me?
Yes, go ahead, Billo.
Okay. Okay, yeah. So basically, as that water comes down into Milton Freewater from the Blues Mountains, the rocks that it's carrying, it deposits it. It no longer has the energy to carry that. And then over time, as that rocks build up, the river shifts because it can no longer flow through there effectively. And this continues to happen throughout the years, and this is referred to as an alluvial fan. So in Milton Freewater, there's roughly this 6 square mile area of this rock bed. And the depth of the rock bed is really quite amazing. In certain places, it is 200 feet. On average, it's about 70 to 80 feet deep. The other great rocky region you may know, Chateauneuf-du-Pape, for example, has a similar size stones called galets. But in Chateauneuf-du-Pape, the rock bed is only about 3 to 4 feet deep. Below that, it's clay and silt and all that stuff. So we're literally growing these vines in this rock bed. So the planting costs are substantially higher. Everything is done by hand to kind of get it established. And if you can imagine, these vines are growing this rock bed. The water holding capacity of this soil is very low, right? So the vines are always under some amount of water stress. And studies have routinely shown that vines that are under water stress generally produce the most complex grapes. So that's really cool. So the other aspect, I think the thing you should take away is that these rocks during the day, they absorb all the solar energy, right? So as it's hitting, the rocks are warming up. So there's two main effects from this. That is, they also conduct that heat into the soil profile. So the roots are generally speaking warmer than other areas, even in Walla Walla. So the bud break is 5 to 7 days earlier in the Rocks District on average than other places in Walla Walla. Also, as that heat re-radiates from the rocks, there is a warming up into the vine, right? So this is known as, for the physicists out there, this black body radiation, right? And black body radiation kind of drops off as the distance to the fourth power. So you'll see what that means is you'll see a lot of these vineyards kind of trellised on a low system. That is, we have it, the fruit zone approximately 14 to 18 inches above the rocks. Right? So we have this re-radiation effect into the clusters, and we see further additional ripening just from the rocks themselves. So by the time harvest comes along, we get a 5-day, 7-day advanced bud break, this radiation effect of the rocks into the vines. This accelerates ripening. So every phenological stage of the grapevine is advanced 5, 7, 10 days. By harvest, we're roughly speaking for Syrah, about 2 weeks ahead of any other Syrah in Walla Walla Valley. So this is kind of a cool thing to see.
It's kind of important though as well, Billo, right? Because you can get kind of early season frosts out there as well, right?
That's correct. Yeah, we had one not too long ago, 2 vintages ago in 19 on October 7th, right? That was quite an early frost for us. So, by and large, most of the Syrah in the Rocks District is kind of ready to pick around September 15th to the 25th. Most of it is typically harvested. One other thing I will point out is that this rocks character, and this we don't really understand from a full science perspective or anything like that, but it is undeniable that it gives this unbelievable expression of terroir into the resulting wines. One thing I really noticed is this extremely perfumed aromatic bouquet that generates in the Syrah. And there's always this lovely kind of a saline umami type of note that and this minerality that kind of resonates on the finish of most Rock District wines. So I think that kind of we see in various producers as a common theme. Some of the things, so the wine you're tasting here is my 2016 Veritas Sequitur. This is from SJR Vineyard, Steve Robertson's vineyard, the one who kind of spearheaded the effort. This is from the Phelps clone and 470 clone. So we got 2 different clones here going on. This was made in 100% whole cluster. We take the tops off puncheons, and these are fermented in open top puncheons. Like I said, whole cluster. We do a cold soak process, maceration, roughly 5 to 8 days, and typically something at that time is going to start the fermentation. If that's something, so on the resin, on the grape skins, there are various hosts of genera of bacteria and yeast that come on the skins. So something is going to start fermenting. If that something is clean, we will let it go and do 100% native fermentation. If something is not so clean and we want to stop that, we will inoculate with a known strain of Saccharomyces. So to date, about 95% of our wines are full native fermentation. So this was 100% native in this case. And then we kind of go through the fermentation process. This was actually on extended maceration as well. So after the primary fermentation was done, it was left on the skins for another 300 or so hours. And then once that textural element was absolutely on point, that's when we took it to press. And then age. The élevage for this was just shy of 2 years in barrel, and then we also bottle aged it for about 14, 15 months before release. Yeah,
I imagine with those with the drought stress and then also the sun and the heat exposure, your berries are quite small on this. So is tannin management and extraction a key consideration for you? And is that why you're doing 100% whole cluster as well, as to minimize some extraction, or how are you working with those
no,
tannins?
that's a great point. Typically speaking, on the rocks district, we get very, very fine grained tannins. So it's not necessarily for the tannin extraction. I like the effect of stem inclusion, and we vary the percentage based on the ripening of the rachis. In 2016, the rachises got very ripe, had just these lovely characteristics. So I was like, well, why not use 100%, right? We've gone as low as 20% in certain years, but so we're somewhere between that 20% and 100% whole cluster. And we just kind of make that determination as to how ripe that rachis gets at harvest. One of the things that we are very, very attuned to is the balance of the wine. That is, in terms of the phenolics, the acidity, the fruit extract, and then the oak. We want to make sure everything is in absolute harmony with one another and that nothing jumps out at you. So I don't really worry about the tannins. I've never seen a rocks district wine be overly tannic. I don't think because of the influence of the rocks or whatever, it does not ever seem to have that character like, say, red mountain wood or something like that, where you can get very burly tannic wines in it. We typically get very fine grained tannins on the rocks. So what else can I tell you about this breed?
So also the what particular characteristics, there's a question from Alec, who wants to know what characteristics about the stem inclusion do you gravitate towards when you're looking for that? Is it purely ripening of the rachis, or are you looking for a structural component or more of a aromatic component?
Yeah, I would say more aromatic. Oftentimes, as the rachis gets riper, we kind of get this very kind of white pepper, almost a Garrigue herb de Provence type of notes that kind of come into it, and I think that's largely from the rachis. Even the phenolic aspects that we get from stem inclusion, they typically are very, very mild in character. So sometimes it can get harsh in some areas. That we also get different, grapes from other AVAs that can be a little bit harsh. I've never seen that in the rocks district, so I don't worry about that. I use that more for the aromatic aspect of it, and I love those herbal touches that it adds into the wine. To me, kind of reads as this kind of dry thyme, almost lavender type of flavor profile.
Yeah, so definitely lavender in there. Absolutely.
Yeah, it has that floral touch in that wine. There's also this bacon fat, kind of this almost a slight gamey touch that we get from the rocks district. This is not derived from Brettanomyces. I'm not a huge fan of Brettanomyces influenced wines, but this we seem to get naturally in the Syrah off the rocks district.
And do you use any Viognier? There is a, I guess, Coruti-esque quality to this Syrah, and yeah, how tempted are you to use Viognier in there, or wash the Syrah with Viognier lees, or?
Yes, no, very tempted. This is 100% Syrah. All of our Veritas are 100%. The reason I don't do that, I also do consultation for Steve Robertson's winery. So I'm the consulting winemaker for Delmas. And for his Syrah, we do the Viognier inclusion of roughly 8 to 9%, and has a very, very, as you mentioned, this Côte Rôtie type of feel to that wine. So I didn't want to copy that for my label. That's not fair to Steve.
You already get to play with that, so you don't need to play with it on your own.
Yeah. Correct. So I would. One other aspect that I haven't touched on. Would anybody like to guess the oak profile on this wine?
Ooh.
See if there are any comments here on this, because I'm curious.
Give us a hint. What are we looking for? Does anyone have any ideas?
Yeah. So it is all French oak. So we don't use at Rasa American oak or Hungarian or things like that. So it is French oak for sure. I was just curious as what people thought the percentage of new French oak was on this wine. I see. Old barrels, 5 years, 45%. Excellent guesses. Okay, so I am going to rather shock you and perhaps shock everybody here. It is 100% new. Oh, there's a guess for 100% new. Excellent. So it is. And this is one of the most interesting things I found about the Rocks District. Now, I have never used 100% new oak on any of my wines, right, that I've ever made, even Cabernet Sauvignon, because I never want it to be dominant in the oak profile. I want it to be a supporting player. So typically on every Syrah I've made to date that were non-Rocks District, I've used no more than 25% new French oak because I thought it started overwhelming the lovely fruit character. But with the Rocks District, I'm not sure why the oak just seems to fully integrate into the wine and become just seamless, that I don't really recognize it, or does it stand out like it would perhaps with other locations. So
yeah,
you know,
it's
so
very hand in glove. Yeah.
yeah. So that's why I was just curious what people thought the oak percentage was here, because to me it just always seems to just disappear into the fabric of the wine, and I noticed all of the other lovely stuff first, and then the oak as a supporting player.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really cool. That was. I'm just getting notices in the chat about we're into happy hour now, and after tasting all of those Rhone varieties and Malbec and the reds, I think we're definitely ready to go into some canned Chardonnay. And if you have a nice day outside, I just went from Pacific Northwest constant drizzle to a hailstorm to now blue skies. So it's kind of fitting that we have a can of Chardonnay to head outside. I really just want to thank Billo. Thank you so much for this beautiful wine, and for your story, and also for being a mentor for Wine Unify, which the Oregon Wine Board has partnered with as well. And so welcome to all of the Wine Unify mentors and mentees that are out here on this masterclass as well. I know that Annette Alvarez-Peters was out there. I think Tanya was out there. I think maybe Alicia was out there. So thank you all for joining, and for all of your questions, and for everyone being very engaging. And Billo, is there anything that you wanted to say about Wine Unify before we wrap up, and before, I don't know if anyone else has a can of Chardonnay, but I do, and since it's nearly 3 o'clock, it's kind of happy hour.
Yeah, no. For Wine Unify, I think Mary Margaret and Martin, we are looking at doing some special things in the wine industry to help minorities in this situation, try to get funding, try to get placements and support, marketing support for their wines. I am working with a gentleman here in Walla Walla to help get his wine brand established and helping him make the wines over at Rasa. So there's a lot of exciting opportunities. We are going to be looking for some funding situations and things like that. So there will be opportunity for everyone here to help. We'll be getting that word out hopefully in the next few weeks about how everyone can help support that. So thank you for all that.
My pleasure. And yes, if there's anyone out there who is a Master of Wine candidate or a Master Sommelier candidate, we do have the Oregon Wine Symposium coming up next week, which is high-level education on viticulture, enology, sales and marketing, and also general trends. And we offer $49 education tickets on that as well. So please get involved. Last thing I'm going to say is pick up, if everyone got in their tasting pack or got an additional Acrobat Chardonnay. This Acrobat Chardonnay for me is kind of like the Village Chablis level wines sourced from Chardonnay all around the state, from the Applegate Valley, from one of the oldest vineyards down there, the Lane Valley, the Lane Vineyard, up to Tualatin Hills. So lots of really fresh, bright fruit flavors, crisp, and is almost a little bit, you know, like mineral waterish. So cheers, everyone. Thank you for being here. Thank you to all my winemakers. If you have time, please come back. Please come back up to to the screen, and we can have happy hour and answer any questions that everyone has. I feel like I should be hiking or in a boat or fishing when I'm drinking this. So sitting in my office is a little bit concerning. But were there any other questions from the audience out there? Thanks to everyone for hanging in there. I'm very happy to have still 125 people hanging around to listen to us talk about Oregon wines. It's beautiful.
So Bree, I think just to remind everyone, if you would like to show your video, all you have to do is raise your hand and I will promote you to a panelist and you're able to show your video. If you prefer not to show your video, you could just listen in and be in the background and still chat. And Bree, I think in the Q&A, we have a bunch of questions that people are asking for some clarification on. Maybe just to lob things off, Applegate Valley. Can you talk a little bit more about Applegate and that AVA?
Yeah, the Applegate Valley AVA was carved out of the larger Rogue Valley AVA based around the Applegate River system, simply because it's almost a lateral valley, almost a lateral east-west valley. So it does get a lot of funneling from wind systems, but also it's a lot of bench lands because of the way that the river has moved through the Applegate Valley throughout its entire life. And so it reveals these bench lands that are alluvial and granite, and they're really, sorry, I'm just trying to stop share. What they do is give a really free draining soil to these old vine Rhone Valley vineyards and Bordeaux varietal vineyards as well. But the Applegate River really is defined by these close proximity of mountains that tend to shade the vineyards as well. So it really is site and aspect specific, along with the soils, and then also the wind movement and wind influences in that valley as well. Other questions? And I know JP and Chad have both worked in the Applegate Valley, so maybe they can also comment on some of the characteristics that come from the fruit from the Applegate Valley as well.
Chad. Well, while Chad is connecting, on mute. Oh, he's on mute. Go for it, Chad.
Go ahead, Chad.
I'll go after you.
In my experience, I feel like the Applegate Valley has a brighter sort of acidity and a fresher fruit profile. Most of what I see in the Rogue Valley tends to have more sun-soaked sort of fruit, darker fruit, heavier tannins. The wines are built a little bit brawnier. And I feel like the Applegate has a little bit more freshness and more acid tension, a little bit lower, I guess a little bit lower in tannin, and a longer hang time, it seems like to me, for most of the varieties that I've worked with. And in general, I've just been very, very excited about the Applegate Valley through, I would say, probably about a dozen different varieties that I've seen grow there.
I'll second that. But so I just find last year, since you mentioned some good things that happened in 2020, so I got to work with another vineyard, which is right there in the Applegate Valley, all red varietals, and it's unrooted and also dry farming, which is to me like Monterey. Boom, like seeing. So which goes off of what Chad said about the tannin structure. This is really concentrated wines because of the no irrigation part. It really, so beautiful structure, really dark color wines. It really warm side. I mean, low yield. I mean, really one of the lowest yield. and this is kind of the older one. So it's hard to find vineyard like that, but I guess I got lucky and I got to talk to a grower that used to be a winemaker and now decided just to sell grapes. And so we started working, because most of the time what we get is like Sauvignon Blanc and some other whites that actually perform well enough for the dry acidity and the close exposure to the breeze coming from the ocean is actually make it cooler side.
Yeah, I would add too that of the Southern Oregon AVAs I've worked with, it seems to be consistently the lowest pH fruit across the board in reds and whites.
And that's contributed by the dry grown farming and also the higher elevation vineyards. A lot of those vineyards are at 1,700 feet elevation and above, and maybe the mountain shading influence as well.
I just want to jump in here. For those of you who are brave enough to put your videos on, thank you for doing that. It's so great to see everyone. For those of you who put your videos on, you can unmute yourself. This is a perfect opportunity. We don't often have 6 brilliant winemakers and Bree stock here to answer your questions. So this is the moment where if you have a question and you want to throw it out there and speak to us live, please do so. And I see people who are not shy, like Max. What's up, my friend?
I don't have any questions right now, but the wines were all fantastic and eye-opening and delicious. Thank you very much for doing this. This was actually probably the most fun of these virtual things I've done so far. So thank you.
Awesome.
So I'll go out there on a limb because it's happy hour. But my question is for Billo and the Rocks District. Really, is that the best name they could come up with? I mean, it's like
it's great. Are you kidding? I love the name of the district. I'll fight you on that one.
For winemakers, we're not that imaginative.
The Rocks District of Milton Freewater. It's a terrific name.
You know, I mean, like Pebble Beach or something a little,
No, you have to tie it back to a historical usage for the TTB. So we did have some other names and stuff, and the TTB said, well, where in what part of history was this area known for this or whatever, things like that. So there was, the first vineyards were planted in this area in 1920, 1930, 32. There's a few vineyards planted there, and they referred to it as the Rocks District back then. So we had to justify it somehow, and that's basically how we did that. So yeah.
I agree with Tanya. The rocks. I love that. Who else has questions out there? Come on, I know none of you are shy.
I was curious about, we talked a little bit about Chardonnay and Eola Amity. And before COVID, I was working as a somm in the Willamette Valley, and one of the projects that myself and my partner were doing were, how do you nail down typicity for something like this, other than, does well in Eola Amity? But what would you say some differences are between, Chehalem, Dundee, Yamhill Chardonnay versus, well, each other?
I can talk about this from a style perspective, but maybe Chad and Ken want to jump in on this, and JP as well, from making Chardonnays across the Willamette Valley as well. But for me, the Chehalem Mountains tend to have a more filigreed and sort of finer profile to them, high acid, and they can tend to be floral, but also more blossomy as well. It also depends on which side of the Chehalem Mountains that you're on, because the Chehalem Mountains is such a big AVA, and you get hit by these northern and easterly winds as well, which can sometimes dry out the fruit a little bit. So you can tend to get some dried orchard fruit characters. But at the higher elevations, I get just a lot of citrus and blossom, and very fine, almost like lemon tangy acidity to them. Whereas for me, the Eola Amity Hills are always, quite salty. Bye, Eric. Quite salty, and have that, like what Ken mentioned, that sort of weight and density combined with a purity of fruit, but definitely a tangy saltiness as well. Chad, you've worked with Ribbon Ridge and Yamhill Carlton as well. And Ken, I know you've worked with Dundee as well. What characteristics would the both of you talk about in terms of those AVAs for Chardonnay?
I think, your descriptions, I think, are dead on, especially looking at some of the producers from the Chehalem Mountains. And here, I do still believe that with a lot of the vines and new plantings of Chardonnay coming into production, I think style still kind of overrides. The Oregon Chardonnay technical tasting that David Adelsheim started, we tried to define place. And I think it's becoming more apparent as more producers work with similar sites, and we see some of these wines aging, and then kind of like the input of the winemaker kind of going in the background as terroir reveals itself through some aging. But I think we're still in a learning process, and Chad can definitely speak to this. Do clones matter? Plant material matter? Rootstocks matter? Absolutely. But I think you can farm a great place from older clones, whether it's Wenti or 108, and still make some brilliant wines. What are those signatures for the Willamette Valley? I think we're still figuring it out. I think everyone on this call can probably, has a snapshot of, I know what Napa tastes like. I know what Sonoma tastes like. I know what Russian River tastes like. Meursault, Puligny, Chassagne, Yarra Valley. But I think we're still truly defining the individual terroirs. Pinot Noir, I think we can go, boom, this Dundee Hills is this, Yamhill Carlton is this, Ribbon Ridge is this, Yosemite Hills is this. But with Chardonnay, I think we have an idea. And I think your descriptions for sure, I probably don't drink as much Willamette Valley Chardonnay. I have, my favorite producers and styles and friends and whatnot, but we're still figuring it out, honestly, in my opinion.
There's a lot of sites to do that with, and still to be discovered. Chad, what about you? Oh, sorry.
Sorry, I was just going to say, Bree, since we're at the 3 o'clock time frame, I just wanted to get one very important sort of overriding question in, which is from Cian about who selected these wines, why these examples. It's certainly not your predictable Oregon. I don't know if you, Bree, or Christina wants to jump in and talk a little bit about the selection and how you guys ended up with 6. It's very difficult to get the entire Oregon into just 6.
Yeah, I think you just answered that, Lemang, is if anyone's been to any of my other masterclass tastings, I'm normally cramming in at least 9 and often 12, but you were pretty rigid about making it 6, and I still got a happy hour wine in, so I still made it 7.
That's true.
There's so much to discover about Oregon, and we all know that Oregon makes amazing Pinot Noir, great quality Pinot Noir from all AVAs except maybe Eastern Oregon. Sorry, Billo. But what I find really exciting about Oregon is all of the older vines, and then some of the newer varietals that are really emerging from these regions, because we now have access to this clonal material that we didn't have 60 years ago. There's 60 years ago from UC Davis, we only had access to certain noble French varieties, and so that was what dominated. And now, you look at the, Foundation Plant Services list of varieties available for planting, and there's literally, hundreds of varieties and clonal material. And so the more that we can explore these different regions and really just allow ourselves to imagine and be curious, which I think is what most people in Oregon are, is they're, you know, they love to explore and they're very curious. And I think that there's just no limitations. This region can make amazing wines from so many different grape varieties. And why would we pigeonhole ourselves into just one or two varieties? There's an entire state to explore. So from my perspective, I wanted to show some of that curiosity and also some of the history that we don't often remember or continue to talk about. And we know, you know, if 2020 has been anything, it's been, you know, an observation of how history and the stories we tell ourselves can shape us. So I want everyone to, you know, understand that we are capable of all of this and we have diversity, and it's really only our curiosity and our, you know, inspiration that really, you know, stops us from being all of this and more. So that's why I chose all of these varieties, and these are some of my favorite people to hang out with, so why wouldn't I include them on a tasting as well?
Awesome. I think Bree, it's really awesome when we see chats where people are asking each other what are some of their favorite Chardonnays coming out of Oregon. It's super cool. Just to remind everyone, we will put all the Q&As into one full thing. Even the questions from the chat page from my team has been doing an amazing job moving it over to Q&A. And then we're going to send this out to Bree, and Bree is going to get answers from the winemakers if it's something specific to your wine. And then we'll get this down to everyone. If you've missed some of the tasting or you want to go back and relive some of that tasting, we will also have the recording for you. Bree, final words before we say goodbye to everybody?
Thank you everyone for being here. Continue to explore. Come and visit Oregon when you can, and continue to drink widely and be curious, and reach out to us. Thanks for being here, everyone. Cheers.
Thank you, everybody. Cheers.
Cheers. Thank you.
Cheers.